The plasma bolt sears through the air, missing Timothy Bell's head by mere inches as he dives behind a crumbling wall. His heart pounds, sweat mixing with the grime on his face. He's separated from his unit, alone in the chaos of battle on the alien world of Xylox. The human colony of New Eden burns around him, victim of an unprovoked Nausicaan assault. Timothy's breath comes in ragged gasps as he assesses his situation. The Nausicaans, a species known for their imposing stature and ruthless nature, are pushing forward, their guttural war cries echoing across the battlefield. He knows he needs to regroup with his fellow soldiers, but movement means certain death. A commotion to his left catches his attention. Through the haze of smoke and debris, Timothy spots a group of Nausicaan warriors dragging one of their own towards a waiting transport ship. The captive, a female, struggles against her captors, her cries of distress carrying over the din of battle. Timothy's combat-honed instincts kick in. Something isn't right. The female's resistance, the rough handling by her own kind, it doesn't fit the Nausicaan's usual battle tactics. In a split second, he makes a decision that will alter the course of 2 lives forever. Gritting his teeth, Timothy rises from his cover. His advanced human weaponry comes to life in his hands, a testament to humanity's technological prowess. He charges the Nausicaan group, outnumbered and outgunned, but driven by a force stronger than self-preservation. The first Nausicaan falls before they realize what's happening. Timothy's superior tactical training gives him an edge, his movements a blur of lethal efficiency. But the aliens are formidable opponents. A plasma blast catches him in the left arm, searing flesh and sending waves of agony through his body. He pushes through the pain, continuing his assault. A Nausicaan blade finds its mark, slicing deep across Timothy's chest. He staggers but doesn't fall. With a final burst of strength, he neutralizes the remaining threats, the last Nausicaan warrior crumpling to the ground at his feet. Panting heavily, blood seeping from his wounds, Timothy turns to the female. She stares at him, her alien features a mix of fear and wonder. He moves quickly to free her from her restraints, his trained hands making short work of the bonds. "I'm Timothy," he manages between labored breaths. "Are you okay?" The female nods, her voice shaky but filled with gratitude. "Daphne, I'm Daphne. Thank you, human. You've saved me from certain death." As Timothy helps Daphne to her feet, she explains her situation. She's a political dissident, advocating for peace between Nausicaans and humans. Her own government had ordered her capture and likely execution for her treasonous views. Timothy's mind races. They're still in danger. The battlefield around them is a maelstrom of destruction, and waves of Nausicaan forces are advancing. Their only hope is to reach the human stronghold, but the path is fraught with peril. A grim realization settles over Timothy. There's only one way to ensure Daphne's safety. He'll have to use himself as a decoy, drawing enemy fire while she makes a run for the human lines. It's a suicide mission, but he's willing to make that sacrifice. As Timothy prepares to put his life on the line once more, he sees something change in Daphne's eyes. Gratitude and admiration shine there, along with something deeper, more primal. In that moment, as the sounds of battle rage around them, an unspoken connection forms between human and alien. It's a connection that will lead to an unexpected and passionate encounter, forever changing both their lives. Timothy's eyes locked with Daphne's, the intensity of their shared moment palpable in the chaos surrounding them. But before either could speak, a familiar voice cut through the din. "Bell, what in the name of Earth are you doing?" Sergeant Marcus Stone emerged from the smoke, leading a squad of human soldiers. His weathered face contorted in a mix of relief and confusion as he took in the scene before him. Timothy snapped to attention, wincing as the movement aggravated his wounds. "Sir, I've rescued a Nausicaan dissident. She's on our side." Stone's eyes narrowed, his grip tightening on his weapon. "Explain, now." As Timothy recounted the events that led to their meeting, Daphne stood tall, her alien features set in drive. When he finished, Stone's skepticism was evident. "A likely story," he growled. "How do we know this isn't some Nausicaan trick?" Daphne stepped forward, her movements graceful despite the tension. "Because I can prove my worth right now." She produced a small device from a hidden pocket in her clothing. This is a Nausicaan communication unit. I can use it to buy us time. Stone's eyebrows shot up. How? By issuing a false retreat order, Daphne explained, her fingers already dancing across the device's surface. It will cause confusion among the enemy forces. Timothy watched in awe as Daphne spoke into the device, her voice taking on a guttural quality as she issued commands in the Nausicaan language. The effect was almost immediate. The sounds of battle shifted, the relentless advance faltering. "It's working," Timothy breathed, a grin spreading across his face despite the pain. Stone nodded grudgingly. "All right, let's move. We need to get back to the stronghold while we have the chance." As they set off, Timothy quickly realized he was the weak link. His injury slowed him down, while Daphne moved with surprising speed and agility. Her alien physiology allowed her to easily outpace the humans, yet she constantly looked back. Concern etched on her features. "Go!" Timothy gasped, waving her on. "Don't let me slow you down." Daphne's response was immediate and firm. "No, you saved my life. I won't abandon you now." They pressed on, the human stronghold growing closer with each labored step. Just as relief began to set in, a flash of movement caught Timothy's eye. A Nausicaan sniper, positioned on a nearby rooftop, took aim at Daphne. Time seemed to slow. Timothy's body moved on instinct, fueled by a surge of adrenaline. He lunged forward, tackling Daphne to the ground as a plasma bolt seared the air where she had been standing. A searing pain erupted in his shoulder as the shot grazed him. Stone's squad reacted instantly, laying down suppressing fire. The sniper fell, but the damage was done. Timothy lay on the ground, the world spinning around him as the cumulative toll of his injuries overwhelmed him. Through the haze of pain, he felt gentle hands cradling his head. Daphne's face swam into focus above him, her alien features twisted with worry. "Stay with me, Timothy," she urged. "We're almost there." The next few minutes passed in a blur of motion and shouted orders. Timothy drifted in and out of consciousness, vaguely aware of being carried into the stronghold's medical facility. The sterile smell of antiseptic filled his nostrils as he was laid on a treatment bed. Dr. Emily Chen's face appeared in his field of vision, her expression grim as she assessed his injuries. Multiple plasma burns, deep lacerations, possible internal bleeding. She rattled off to her staff. "Prep for emergency surgery." "Wait!" Daphne's voice cut through the fog in Timothy's mind. "I can help him." Chen's eyes narrowed. "What are you talking about?" "Nausicaan females possess natural healing abilities," Daphne explained hurriedly. "Through physical contact, I can accelerate his recovery." Chen's skepticism was evident, but the desperation of the situation won out. "Fine, but I'll be monitoring every second of this procedure." Timothy felt Daphne's hands on his chest, a warmth spreading from the points of contact. A soft blue glow emanated from her palms, bathing the room in ethereal light. The pain that had been consuming him began to ebb, replaced by a tingling sensation that spread throughout his body. As his wounds knitted themselves closed before their eyes, Timothy found himself lost in Daphne's gaze. The connection between them deepened, transcending species and the chaos of war that surrounded them. The moment was shattered by the blaring of alarms. Sergeant Stone burst into the medical bay, his face a mask of urgency. "The Nausicaans have regrouped," he shouted over the din. "They're launching a massive assault on our defenses." Despite Dr. Chen's protest, Timothy pushed himself up. The healing wasn't complete, but he felt strength returning to his limbs. "I need to get to the command center," he insisted. Daphne's hand found his. "I'm coming with you. My knowledge of Nausicaan tactics could be crucial." As they raced through the corridors of the stronghold, Timothy couldn't help but marvel at Daphne's fluid movements. Her alien grace was captivating, stirring feelings he hadn't expected in the midst of war. They burst into the command center, where Colonel James Harper was coordinating the defense. His eyes widened at the sight of Daphne. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded. Timothy stepped forward. "Sir, this is Daphne. She's a Nausicaan dissident with invaluable intelligence on enemy tactics. She's already saved my life and helped us escape a deadly situation." Harper's expression remained stern, but he nodded curtly. Very well. What can you tell us about their assault? As Daphne began to speak, detailing the intricacies of Nausicaan battle strategies, Timothy felt a swell of admiration. Her insights were sharp, her knowledge extensive. With each passing moment, the humans gained ground, targeting weak points in the Nausicaan offensive. Throughout the frenetic activity of the command center, Timothy found his gaze continually drawn to Daphne. The way her eyes lit up as she explained a complex maneuver, the determined set of her jaw as she analyzed tactical displays. All of it stirred something deep within him. For her part, Daphne seemed equally aware of Timothy. Their eyes met frequently, silent understanding passing between them. In the heat of battle, amidst the clash of two worlds, an unlikely bond was forming, one that promised to change both their lives forever. As the Nausicaan assault began to falter under the humans' counterattack, Timothy and Daphne shared a moment of triumph. Their fingers brushed as they both reached for the same tactical display, sending a jolt of electricity through Timothy's body that had nothing to do with the battle raging outside. The war was nowhere near the end, but in that moment a new chapter was beginning, one that neither human nor Nausicaan could have anticipated. The chaos of battle faded into the background as they gazed at each other, a silent understanding passing between them. The moment was shattered by Colonel Harper's sharp voice. "Bell, I want you and our Nausicaan friend on the defense systems. Now!" Timothy snapped back to attention, giving a crisp nod. "Yes, sir." He led Daphne to a bank of monitors displaying complex holographic readouts of the base's defenses. Their hands moved in tandem across the controls, adjusting shield frequencies and targeting parameters with practiced ease. "Your understanding of our systems is impressive," Timothy remarked, watching Daphne's nimble fingers dance across the interface. She flashed him a quick smile. "I've always been fascinated by technology, especially that of other species. It's part of what led me to advocate for peace." As they worked, Daphne spoke in hushed tones about her life on the Nausicaan homeworld. She described the growing unrest, the fear of human expansion that had driven her people to war. "I saw a different path," she explained, her eyes never leaving the screens. "One where our species could learn from each other, grow together." Timothy found himself hanging on her every word, captivated by her passion and conviction. Their hands brushed as they both reached for the same control panel, sending a jolt of electricity through his body. He glanced at Daphne, seeing his own mix of surprise and longing reflected in her alien features. Before either could speak, a deafening explosion rocked the command center. Alarms blared as smoke filled the air. "Report!" Colonel Harper bellowed over the chaos. "Sir!" a technician shouted. "Nausicaaan's stealth team has breached the perimeter. They're heading for the power core." Harper's face hardened. "Bell, take a team and stop them. Now." Timothy nodded, already moving. "Daphne, I need you to stay here and keep coordinating the defense. You're our best chance at holding them off." She grabbed his arm, concern evident in her eyes. "Be careful, Timothy." He squeezed her hand briefly before racing out of the command center. In the corridor, he quickly assembled a squad, including the grizzled Sergeant Stone and Private Sarah Chen, a young but promising soldier he recognized as Dr. Chen's sister. They moved swiftly through the base, encountering pockets of Nausicaan resistance. Timothy's combat instincts kicked into overdrive, his body moving almost on autopilot as he neutralized threats with lethal efficiency. As they approached the power core, the resistance intensified. Plasma bolts sizzled through the air, leaving scorch marks on the walls. Timothy ducked behind a fallen support beam, returning fire. "Stone, cover me!" he shouted, preparing to advance. But before he could move, a cry of pain rang out. Private Chen stumbled, clutching her side where a Nausicaan blade had found its mark. "Get her out of here," Timothy ordered Stone, who scooped up the wounded soldier without hesitation. Alone now, Timothy pressed on. He reached the power core chamber, its massive generators humming with nearly unleashed energy. There, waiting for him, stood a Nausicaan warrior of truly impressive proportions. "I am Grok," the alien growled, baring razor-sharp teeth. "And you will die here, human." Timothy raised his weapon, but Grok was faster than he looked. With a swipe of his massive arm, He sent Timothy's gun clattering across the floor. There was no time to retrieve it. Grok was already charging. The two collided in a fury of fists and feet. Timothy's human agility gave him an edge, allowing him to dance around Grok's powerful but slower attacks. But each blow that connected sent shockwaves of pain through his body. In the command center, Daphne watched Timothy's life signs fluctuate wildly on the monitor. Her heart raced as she saw his vitals spike dangerously. Without thinking, she accessed the base's electromagnetic systems, her fingers flying over the controls. Back in the power core, Timothy felt his strength flagging. Grok had him pinned against a wall, massive hands closing around his throat. Timothy's vision began to blur as he gasped for air. Suddenly, Grok's grip loosened. The Nautican's eyes rolled back in his head as he stumbled backward, disoriented. Timothy didn't waste the opportunity. He launched himself at Grok, using every ounce of his remaining strength to subdue the alien warrior. As the last of the Nautican infiltrators were rounded up, Timothy made his way back to the command center. He found Daphne waiting for him, relief evident on her face. "You did it," she breathed, reaching out to touch his bruised face. "We did it," Timothy corrected her, wincing slightly at the contact but leaning into her touch all the same. Colonel Harper approached, his stern expression softening slightly. "Well done, both of you. The Nausicaans are in full retreat. It seems we've won the day." As the adrenaline of battle began to fade, Timothy felt the full weight of exhaustion settling over him. He swayed slightly on his feet, and Daphne was quick to steady him. "You need medical attention," she insisted, concern evident in her voice. Timothy opened his mouth to protest, but Dr. Chen appeared as if summoned. "No arguments, Belle. You're coming with me." As Dr. Chen led him away, Timothy cast one last look at Daphne. Their eyes met, and in that moment, the world seemed to fall away. The promise of something more, something beyond the chaos of war, hung between them. But reality intruded once again as Colonel Harper approached Daphne, his expression serious. "We've received word that officials from Earth's United Defense Force are on their way. They'll want to debrief you on Nautican strategies." Daphne nodded, her mind racing with the implications. As she watched Timothy disappear down the corridor, she couldn't help but wonder what the future held for them both. As Daphne watched Timothy disappear down the corridor with Dr. Chen, she steeled herself for the interrogation to come. The arrival of Earth's United Defense Force officials marked the beginning of a grueling debriefing process that would stretch on for days. Hour after hour, Daphne found herself in a stark room, facing a panel of stern-faced officers. She answered their relentless questions, detailing Nautican military strategies, weaknesses, and technologies. Despite her exhaustion, she remained composed, her drive to aid the human cause unwavering. Meanwhile, Timothy underwent a rigorous recovery process under Dr. Chen's watchful eye. The combination of her medical expertise and the lingering effects of Daphne's healing touch accelerated his healing. As his strength returned, Timothy's thoughts often drifted to Daphne, wondering how she was faring under the UDF's scrutiny. On the fourth day of debriefings, Daphne's patience was wearing thin. She rubbed her temples, fighting off a headache as she faced yet another round of questioning. "Once again, describe the Nautican stealth technology," a gruff UDF official demanded. Daphne sighed. "As I've explained, their cloaking devices operate on a rotating frequency that—" The door burst open, interrupting her response. Colonel Harper strode in, his presence immediately commanding attention. "That's enough," he declared. "This interrogation is over." The UDF officials exchanged glances, clearly displeased. "Colonel, we're not finished." "Yes, you are," Harper cut them off. "I've just received word from High Command. They've reviewed your reports and have come to a decision." Daphne straightened in her chair, her heart racing. Was this the moment her fate would be decided? Harper turned to her, his expression softening slightly. "Daphne, your cooperation and the intelligence you've provided have been invaluable. High Command recognizes your potential as an asset to our cause." He paused, letting the words sink in. "They've proposed integrating you into a special ops team, alongside Lieutenant Bell." Daphne's eyes widened. "Timothy? He's recovered?" Harper nodded. Thanks to Dr. Chen and your healing abilities, he's back on his feet. In fact, he's waiting outside. If you're willing, we'd like to brief you both on a new mission." Without hesitation, Daphne stood. "I'm ready." As they exited the room, Daphne saw Timothy leaning against the opposite wall. Their eyes met, and the world seemed to fade away for a moment. Timothy straightened, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Welcome to the team," he said softly. Before Daphne could respond, Harper ushered them into a nearby conference room. Inside, they found Sergeant Stone and a young woman Daphne recognized as Private Chen, looking fully recovered from her injuries. Harper wasted no time getting to the point. "We've identified a Nausicaan forward base on the outskirts of the conflict zone. Your mission is to infiltrate, gather intelligence, and, if possible, sabotage their operations." He activated a holographic display showing a 3D representation of the target. "You'll be operating deep in enemy territory with minimal support. This is high risk, but the potential payoff is enormous." Timothy leaned forward, studying the hologram intently. "What's our insertion method?" "We have a prototype stealth shuttle," Harper explained. "It should get you past their outer defenses undetected." As Harper continued outlining the mission parameters, Daphne found her gaze drawn to Timothy. She noted the determined set of his jaw, the intensity in his eyes as he absorbed the details. A warmth spread through her chest, a feeling she quickly tried to suppress. This was no time for distractions. The briefing concluded, and Harper dismissed them to begin their preparations. "You have 3 days to train and get ready," he said. "Make them count." The next 72 hours were a whirlwind of activity. Timothy and Daphne found themselves thrust into intensive combat simulations, forced to quickly develop a seamless partnership. Their differing physiologies and fighting styles initially clashed, leading to frustrating failures in the training scenarios. During one particularly grueling session, Timothy and Daphne found themselves pinned down by simulated enemy fire. Sweat poured down Timothy's face as he shouted over the din of explosions. "We need to flank them," he yelled. "Cover me!" Daphne shook her head vehemently. "No, that's exactly what they'll expect. Trust me." Their eyes locked for a moment, a silent battle of wills. Finally, Timothy nodded. "Lead the way." Daphne moved with fluid grace, using her knowledge of Nausicaan tactics to predict and counter the simulated enemy's movements. Timothy followed her lead, providing covering fire with deadly accuracy. When the smoke cleared, they stood victorious amidst a field of deactivated holo targets. As the simulation faded away, Timothy turned to Daphne with newfound respect. "That was incredible," he admitted. Daphne allowed herself a small smile. "We make a good team." The moment was interrupted by the training room's environmental controls malfunctioning. The temperature spiked rapidly, and Daphne suddenly felt her body temperature rising to dangerous levels. "Daphne!" Timothy's voice sounded distant as she swayed on her feet. "What's wrong?" "Too hot," she gasped, her alien physiology struggling to cope with the sudden change. "Need to cool down." Without hesitation, Timothy scooped her up in his arms and rushed her to the nearby medical bay. Dr. Chen was thankfully absent, leaving Timothy to handle the situation alone. He laid Daphne on an examination table and quickly activated the room's cooling systems. As cold air blasted from the vents, Timothy grabbed a medical tricorder, scanning Daphne's vital signs. "Your core temperature is dangerously high," he muttered, concern etched on his face. "We need to cool you down fast." Acting on instinct, Timothy began applying cool compress packs to Daphne's pulse points. His hands moved efficiently, professional, but he couldn't ignore the electricity that sparked through him at each point of contact. Daphne's eyes fluttered open, locking onto Timothy's face. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice husky. Timothy swallowed hard, acutely aware of their proximity. "Just doing my job," he replied, his tone softer than he intended. As Daphne's temperature slowly returned to normal, neither of them moved to break the intimate moment. The air between them crackled with unspoken tension, a stark reminder of the feelings they'd been struggling to keep at bay. Finally, Timothy cleared his throat and stepped back. "How do you feel?" Daphne sat up slowly, testing her limbs. "Much better," she said. "We should get back to training." Timothy nodded, relief and something else, regret, flashing across his face. Right. We've still got a lot of work to do. As they made their way back to the training room, both were acutely aware of the growing connection between them. But with the mission looming, they silently agreed to focus on the task at hand. There would be time to explore these feelings later, if they survived. The night before the mission, the team gathered for a final briefing. The atmosphere was tense as they reviewed the latest intelligence. Just as they were about to conclude, the door opened to admit a new face. Major Eliza Blackwood, UDF Intelligence, the stern-faced woman introduced herself, striding into the room with an air of authority. I have some last-minute updates on the Nausicaan base's defenses. As Blackwood began her presentation, her gaze fell on Daphne. Her eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. I trust our guest has been thoroughly vetted, she asked, her tone dripping with skepticism. Timothy bristled at the implication. Daphne has proven her loyalty time and again, he snapped. Without her, we wouldn't even know about this base. Blackwood's eyebrows rose. Careful, Lieutenant. Your personal feelings shouldn't cloud your judgment. The room temperature seemed to drop several degrees as tension mounted. Colonel Harper, sensing the potential for conflict, quickly intervened. That's enough, he said firmly. Major Blackwood, I can personally vouch for Daphne's commitment to our cause. Now, let's focus on the mission at hand. The briefing continued, but the undercurrent of tension remained. As they were dismissed, Timothy caught Daphne's eye. She gave him a small nod of gratitude, which he returned with a reassuring smile. As dawn broke the next morning, the team assembled on the landing pad. The prototype stealth shuttle gleamed in the early light, its sleek lines promising speed and secrecy. Lieutenant Rodriguez, their pilot, ran through the final pre-flight checks as the team boarded. Timothy settled into the co-pilot's seat, with Daphne directly behind him. As the shuttle's engines hummed to life, he felt a gentle touch on his shoulder. Ready? Daphne asked softly. Timothy placed his hand over hers for a brief moment. Ready. The shuttle lifted off smoothly, quickly leaving the safety of the human stronghold behind. As they approached the Nausicaan-controlled territory, an uneasy silence fell over the cabin. Everyone knew the stakes and the risks of what lay ahead. Suddenly, warning lights flashed across the control panel. The shuttle lurched violently, throwing its occupants against their restraints. What's happening? Sergeant Stone demanded. Lieutenant Rodriguez's hands flew over the controls. We've lost power to the port engine, he reported, his voice tight with stress. The stealth systems are failing. Timothy unbuckled his harness, moving to assist Rodriguez. Can we restore power? Negative, Rodriguez grunted. We're losing altitude fast. Brace for impact. As the ground rushed up to meet them, Timothy felt a surge of grit. They'd come too far to fail now. He turned to Daphne, an idea forming. Your knowledge of Nausicaan tech, he said quickly. Can you help me reroute power from non-essential systems? Daphne nodded, already moving to access a control panel. I'll try. Working in perfect sync, Timothy and Daphne's hands danced over the shuttle's systems. Timothy's piloting skills, combined with Daphne's intimate knowledge of Nausicaan technology, created a slim chance at survival. Brace yourselves, Timothy shouted as the shuttle plummeted through the dense canopy of an alien forest. The world became a cacophony of screeching metal and splintering wood. Timothy's last conscious thought was of Daphne's hand gripping his tightly as darkness engulfed them. Them. Timothy's eyes snapped open, his body tense and alert. The acrid smell of smoke and twisted metal filled his nostrils as he took in their surroundings. The shuttle lay in ruins around them, sunlight filtering through the torn hull. A groan beside him drew his attention. Daphne stirred, her hands still clasped tightly in his. Timothy, she murmured, blinking away the disorientation. I'm here, he replied, his voice hoarse. Are you hurt? Before she could answer, a distant sound caught their attention. Timothy's blood ran cold as he recognized the telltale hum of Nausicaan scout vehicles. We need to move, he said urgently, releasing Daphne's hand and scrambling to his feet. They're coming. The team gathered quickly, assessing their situation. Lieutenant Rodriguez lay semi-conscious, a nasty gash across his forehead. Sergeant Stone and Private Chen seemed relatively unharmed, though shaken. Timothy's mind raced as he formulated a plan. The approaching Nausicaans left them with precious little time. He knew they were vastly outnumbered, and staying together would only increase their chances of capture, or worse. "Listen up," he said, his voice low but commanding. "We're splitting up. Stone, Chen, I need you to create a diversion. Draw them away from our position. Daphne and I will press on towards the base with Rodriguez." Stone's eyes widened. "Sir, with all due respect—" "It's our best chance," Timothy cut him off. He reached into his pocket and produced a small data chip. "Take this. It contains all the intelligence we've gathered so far. If we don't make it, at least the mission won't be a total loss." Stone hesitated for a moment before nodding grimly. He took the chip, tucking it securely into his vest. "Good luck, sir," he said, snapping a crisp salute. As Stone and Chen moved out, Timothy turned to Daphne. Together, they carefully lifted Rodriguez, supporting him between them. The lieutenant groaned, his eyes fluttering open briefly before closing again. They set off into the dense alien forest, the unfamiliar terrain immediately presenting challenges. Strange, phosphorescent plants glowed faintly in the shadows, while thick vines snaked across their path. The air was thick with an odd, sweet scent that made Timothy's head swim. They had been moving for nearly an hour when a rustling in the underbrush stopped them in their tracks. Timothy's hand instinctively went to his weapon as a group of large, predatory creatures emerged from the foliage. The beasts defied easy description, resembling a nightmarish fusion of earth wolves and oversized insects. Their segmented bodies were covered in a chitinous exoskeleton, while razor-sharp mandibles clicked menacingly. 6 glowing eyes fixed on the humans with predatory intent. "Don't move," Daphne whispered, her body tense. "They hunt by movement." Timothy froze, his heart pounding. He could feel Rodriguez's labored breathing against his side, knowing that any sudden motion could spell their doom. The creatures stalked closer, their mandibles twitching as they scented the air. Timothy's finger tightened on the trigger of his weapon, knowing that opening fire would likely attract Nausicaan patrols. Suddenly, Daphne began to emit a low thrumming sound from deep in her throat. The vibration seemed to confuse the predators, their movements becoming erratic. Taking advantage of their disorientation, Timothy slowly reached for a small canister on his belt. With a quick motion, he tossed the smoke grenade into the midst of the creatures. As acrid smoke billowed out, the beast screeched and scattered, disappearing back into the undergrowth. "How did you know to do that?" Timothy asked as they resumed their journey, his admiration for Daphne growing. She gave a small shrug. "Similar creatures on my homeworld. The vibration disrupts their sensory organs." As they pressed on, Timothy noticed Daphne's growing fatigue. Her attempts to heal Rodriguez were taking their toll, and the constant strain of their treacherous journey was wearing on her. "We need to rest," Timothy decided, spotting a secluded cave entrance partially hidden by hanging vines. "Just for a little while." Daphne nodded gratefully as they carefully maneuvered Rodriguez into the cave. As she tended to the lieutenant's wounds, Timothy took up a position at the entrance, his weapon at the ready. In the relative quiet of their temporary shelter, Timothy found his gaze drawn to Daphne. Her face was etched with concentration as she worked, a strand of hair falling across her forehead. Without thinking, he reached out to brush it away. Their eyes met, and for a moment the dangers outside seemed to fade away. Timothy felt an overwhelming urge to pull her close, to seek comfort in her embrace amidst the chaos of their situation. Daphne's breath caught as she leaned in slightly, her lips parting. The air between them crackled with unspoken desire and the weight of their shared experiences. Just as Timothy's hand cupped her cheek, a sound from outside shattered the moment. Nausicaan voices, harsh and guttural, echoed in the forest. "They're close," Daphne whispered, her eyes wide with alarm. Timothy's mind raced, formulating a plan. He motioned for Daphne to move deeper into the cave with Rodriguez, then positioned himself just inside the entrance. As the Nausicaan patrol entered the cave, Timothy struck. Using Daphne's insights into their behavior, he anticipated their movements perfectly. In a flurry of silent, precise strikes, he neutralized the threat without raising an alarm. But the skirmish left its mark. As Timothy turned back to Daphne, he felt a sharp pain in his arm. Looking down, he saw a deep gash where a Nausicaan blade had found its mark. "Let me," Daphne said, her hands already glowing with healing energy. Despite his protests, she insisted on treating his wound. As her hands worked their magic, Timothy felt the familiar spark of connection between them intensify. Their faces were inches apart, and he could feel the warmth of her breath on his skin. The moment stretched, charged with possibility, but reality intruded once more as Rodriguez stirred, reminding them of the urgency of their mission. As they prepared to move out, Timothy made a startling discovery while searching the fallen Nausicaans. A datapad containing critical information about the base's defenses and hints of a larger, more sinister plan. "This changes everything," Timothy muttered, his mind racing with the implications. "We need to get this information back to command." With renewed perseverance, they set out once more. Rodriguez, showing signs of improvement, was able to move under his own power, albeit slowly. As they neared their destination, a new complication arose. Hidden in a small clearing, they spotted a Nausicaan communication outpost. Timothy's tactical mind immediately recognized the opportunity and the risk it presented. "We could potentially contact the stronghold for extraction," he whispered to Daphne, "but it's a huge risk." Before Daphne could respond, movement at the outpost caught their attention. A familiar figure strode into view, his massive frame unmistakable even at a distance. "Grok," Timothy breathed, recognizing the Nausicaan warrior he had fought at the human stronghold. The implications were clear. The Nausicaans knew they were coming, and their defenses would be on high alert. As they crouched at the edge of the clearing, hidden from view, Timothy felt the weight of their next decision bearing down on him. The communication outpost represented both opportunity and danger, a chance to call for help, but also a potential trap that could derail their entire mission. He glanced at Daphne, seeing the same mixture of grit and uncertainty in her eyes that he felt. Rodriguez leaned heavily against a tree, his condition stable but far from ideal for a firefight. The forest around them seemed to hold its breath as Timothy weighed their options, knowing that their next move could determine not only the fate of their mission, but potentially the course of the entire war. Conflict. Timothy took a deep breath, steadying himself. He turned to Daphne and Rodriguez, his voice barely above a whisper. "We need that intel," he said, gesturing towards the Nausicaan outpost. "And a way to contact base. It's risky, but it might be our only shot." Daphne nodded, her eyes scanning the facility. "I can bypass their security protocols," she said, "but we'll need a distraction." Rodriguez, still pale but standing straighter, gripped his weapon. "I'll draw their attention, give you two a chance to slip in." Timothy clapped him on the shoulder. "You sure you're up for it?" The lieutenant managed a grim smile. "Try and stop me, sir." As night fell, they put their plan into action. Rodriguez circled to the far side of the outpost, setting off a series of small explosions that sent Nausicaan guards scrambling. In the chaos, Timothy and Daphne slipped through a side entrance, Daphne's fingers flying over the access panel. Inside, they moved swiftly through dimly lit corridors. Daphne's knowledge of Nausicaan layouts proved invaluable as she guided them towards the command center. They ducked into alcoves and empty rooms, narrowly avoiding patrols. The command center was a hub of activity, screens flickering with data streams and communication channels. Timothy's eyes widened as he took in the wealth of information. "Look at this," he breathed, gesturing to a central display. "It's a full battle plan. They're planning a massive offensive against our colonies." Daphne was already connecting a data device, her fingers a blur over the alien interface. "Downloading now," she said. "I'll try to establish a secure link to the stronghold." Timothy kept watch, his muscles tense as he listened for approaching footsteps. The minutes stretched, each second feeling like an eternity. Suddenly, the door hissed open. Timothy spun, weapon raised, only to find himself face-to-face with Grok. The massive Nausicaan warrior filled the doorway, his eyes narrowing as he recognized Timothy. "You!" Grok growled, his hand reaching for his own weapon. Timothy didn't hesitate. He launched himself at Grok, driving his shoulder into the alien's midsection. They crashed to the floor, grappling fiercely. Grok's strength was overwhelming, but Timothy's human agility gave him an edge. He twisted out of a crushing hold, landing a series of quick strikes to Grok's face and torso. The Nausicaan roared, hurling Timothy across the room. He slammed into a console, pain lancing through his side. Grok advanced, his massive fist swinging. Timothy ducked and weaved, using the room's geometry to his advantage. He vaulted over consoles, using them as cover to land hit-and-run attacks on his larger opponent. Behind them, Daphne worked frantically, her eyes darting between the data transfer and the ongoing fight. "Almost there," she called out. Grok caught Timothy with a glancing blow, sending him stumbling. The Nausicaan pressed his advantage, raining down punishing strikes. Timothy felt his defenses weakening, his movements slowing. In desperation, he feinted left, then drove his knee into Grok's midsection. As the Nausicaan doubled over, Timothy brought his elbow down hard on the back of Grok's head. The alien warrior crumpled to the floor, unconscious. Timothy staggered, clutching his side. He could feel warm blood seeping through his fingers. "It's done," Daphne said, disconnecting the data device. "I've sent everything to the stronghold, including our coordinates." As if on cue, alarms began blaring throughout the outpost. The sound of running feet echoed in the corridors. "Time to go," Timothy grunted, fighting through the pain. They fled the command center, Daphne leading them to a maintenance access point. They crawled through cramped ventilation shafts, the sound of pursuit growing louder behind them. They emerged into the cool night air, immediately spotting Rodriguez in a commandeered Nausicaan transport. They piled in, Rodriguez gunning the engine before they were fully seated. The transport roared away from the outpost, Nausicaan pursuit vehicles hot on their tail. Rodriguez's piloting was nothing short of miraculous as he wove through the alien forest, using the dense vegetation for cover. "Head for that ravine," Daphne called out, pointing to a deep gash in the landscape ahead. "Their sensors can't penetrate the mineral deposits there." Rodriguez nodded grimly, pushing the transport to its limits. They plunged into the ravine, the pursuing vehicles falling back as their sensors went dark. As the immediate danger passed, Daphne turned her attention to Timothy's wound. Her hands glowed with healing energy as she pressed them against his side. Timothy gasped at the contact, feeling the familiar spark between them intensify. Their eyes met, the air thick with unspoken emotion. For a moment, the universe seemed to shrink to just the two of them. Timothy's hand found hers, their fingers intertwining. The moment was broken by a burst of static from the transport's communication system. A coded message flashed across the screen. The stronghold had received their intel and was dispatching an extraction team. "We've got a few hours until the rendezvous," Rodriguez said, his eyes on the treacherous terrain ahead. "And you can bet every Nausicaan in the sector will be looking for us." Timothy nodded, his tactical mind already formulating plans. "We'll need to find cover, someplace to lie low until extraction arrives." As they pressed deeper into the alien wilderness, none of them noticed the shadowy figures watching from the trees. The Zix, hidden by their advanced cloaking technology, observed the strange trio with growing interest. Zyra, the Zix leader, studied the human and Nausicaan with particular fascination. There was something about their interaction, a connection that defied the animosity between their species. Perhaps, she thought, these outsiders held the key to changing the course of this destructive conflict. As dawn broke over the alien world, Timothy, Daphne, and Rodriguez found themselves facing new challenges and unexpected allies. The fate of two warring species hung in the balance, with the bond between a human and a Nausicaan at its center. As dawn broke over the alien world, Timothy, Daphne, and Rodriguez found themselves facing new challenges and unexpected allies. The fate of two warring species hung in the balance, with the bond between a human and a Nausicaan at its core. A soft shimmer in the air caught Timothy's attention. He blinked, unsure if his eyes were playing tricks on him. Suddenly, a group of lithe, otherworldly figures materialized before them. The Zix, with their iridescent skin and large almond-shaped eyes, regarded the trio with curiosity. Zyra, their leader, stepped forward. "We have observed your struggle," she said, her voice a melodic whisper. "Your connection intrigues us. We offer our assistance." Timothy exchanged glances with Daphne and Rodriguez. The lieutenant nodded, his hand still on his weapon. Daphne's eyes widened with recognition. The Zix, she breathed. I've heard whispers of their advanced technology. We accept your help, Timothy said, addressing Zira. We need to reach our extraction point. The Zix leader nodded, gesturing to her companions. They surrounded the group, their bodies emitting a faint, pulsing glow. Timothy felt a tingling sensation wash over him as the Zix's cloaking technology enveloped them. With their newfound allies, they made swift progress through the alien landscape. The Zix's cloaking kept them hidden from Nausicaan patrols, allowing them to move freely towards the rendezvous coordinates. As they neared their destination, Timothy's instincts flared. He held up a hand, signaling the group to stop. Ahead, barely visible through the dense foliage, was a massive Nausicaan blockade. Armored vehicles and heavily armed soldiers formed an impenetrable barrier. They've anticipated our route, Rodriguez whispered, his face grim. Timothy's mind raced, assessing their options. That's when he spotted it, a dilapidated structure half hidden by overgrown vegetation. There, he pointed. That old mining facility. We can take cover there and reassess. They made their way to the abandoned building, the Zix's cloaking technology allowing them to slip past Nausicaan sentries. Inside, the facility was a maze of rusted equipment and crumbling walls. Rodriguez's eyes lit up as he spotted a bank of old communication devices. This equipment, he said, running his hands over the dusty consoles. It's old, but I might be able to boost our signal, contact the extraction team. Timothy nodded. Do it. Daphne and I will secure the perimeter. As Rodriguez worked, Timothy and Daphne moved through the facility, setting up defensive positions. Their movements were synchronized, anticipating each other's actions without a word. In the dim light, Timothy caught Daphne's gaze. The intensity in her eyes made his breath catch. A crackle of static broke the moment. Rodriguez's voice came through their comms. I've got a signal. Patching us through to the extraction team now. Timothy and Daphne rushed back to the command center. Rodriguez's face was pale as he looked up from the console. Bad news. The Nausicaans intercepted our transmission. They know we're here. Outside, the sound of approaching vehicles filled the air. Timothy's mind shifted into tactical mode. We need to fortify this position. Rodriguez, keep working on that signal. Daphne, you know Nausicaan tactics. Help me set up defenses. They worked frantically, using their combined knowledge to create a series of traps and defensive positions. As they worked side by side, Timothy was acutely aware of Daphne's presence. The heat of her body, the scent of her skin. It was intoxicating, even in the midst of their dire situation. The first Nausicaan assault came swiftly. Explosions rocked the facility as they breached the outer defenses. Timothy, Daphne, and Rodriguez fought with coordinated precision, repelling wave after wave of attackers. In a lull between assaults, Rodriguez's comm crackled to life. A stern female voice came through. This is Major Eliza Blackwood. We've received your coordinates, but Nausicaan anti-aircraft fire is preventing us from landing. There's a clearing 2 clicks north of your position. If you can reach it, we can extract you there. Timothy looked at his teammates. Both were exhausted, but drive burned in their eyes. We're going to have to fight our way out, he said. They burst from the facility, catching the Nausicaans off guard. Timothy led the charge, his movements fluid and deadly. Daphne was right beside him, her insider knowledge allowing her to anticipate and counter Nausicaan maneuvers. Rodriguez brought up the rear, using his technical skills to overload Nausicaan weapons and shields. As they neared the tree line, a familiar roar cut through the chaos. Grok, his massive form unmistakable, charged towards them. The Nausicaan warrior's eyes locked onto Timothy, filled with rage and the promise of vengeance. Go! Timothy shouted to Daphne and Rodriguez. Get to the clearing. I'll handle Grok. Daphne hesitated, her eyes wide with concern. Timothy gave her a reassuring nod, then turned to face his nemesis. Grok and Timothy clashed in a furious exchange of blows. The Nausicaan's raw strength was overwhelming, but Timothy's speed and adaptability kept him in the fight. They traded punishing strikes, neither willing to give ground. As the battle raged on, Timothy felt his strength waning. Grok seized the advantage, landing a crushing blow that sent Timothy reeling. The Nausicaan moved in for the kill, his massive hands reaching for Timothy's throat. Suddenly, Daphne was there. With precise movements, she struck at a point on Grok's neck, a weakness in Nausicaan physiology that she alone knew. The massive alien stumbled, his grip loosening. Timothy seized the moment. With a burst of adrenaline, he launched a final devastating combination of strikes. Grok crashed to the ground, finally defeated. There was no time to savor the victory. Nausicaan reinforcements were closing in. Timothy, Daphne, and Rodriguez made a final sprint for the clearing. The whine of engines filled the air as Major Blackwood's ship descended, dodging Nausicaan fire with expert precision. As they scrambled aboard, a stray shot rocked the ship. Alarms blared as the engines sputtered. "We've lost power to the main thrusters," Blackwood shouted from the cockpit. Without hesitation, Timothy and Daphne rushed to the engine room. Working in perfect synchronization, they rerouted power from non-essential systems. Their hands brushed as they worked, sending electric shivers through Timothy's body despite the dire situation. The engines roared back to life just as Nausicaan forces reached the clearing. The ship lurched skyward, narrowly escaping a barrage of enemy fire. As they broke atmosphere, Major Blackwood's voice came over the intercom. "Well done, team. The intel you've gathered is invaluable. We're preparing a major counteroffensive." Timothy felt a moment of triumph, but it was short-lived. Blackwood continued, her voice grave. "There's a complication. Daphne's presence has caused some political waves. There are factions calling for her to be handed over to the Nausicaans as a peace gesture." Timothy's blood ran cold. He turned to Daphne, seeing the mix of fear and tenacity in her eyes. He took her hand, his grip firm and reassuring. "That's not going to happen," he said, his voice low and intense. "I won't let it." Daphne squeezed his hand in return. "I'm not backing down," she whispered. "I'll keep fighting for your cause. For our cause." As the ship sped towards human-controlled space, Timothy felt the weight of new challenges ahead. The war was nowhere near the end, and now personal stakes had been raised even higher. But with Daphne by his side, he felt ready to face whatever came next. The adrenaline of their escape began to fade, replaced by an acute awareness of Daphne's closeness. The shared moments of danger, the synchronized movements of battle, it all culminated in a tension that crackled between them. Timothy knew that soon, very soon, they would need to address the unspoken attraction that had been building since their first encounter. For now, though, they had a moment of respite. As the ship carried them towards an uncertain future, Timothy allowed himself to savor the warmth of Daphne's hand in his, and the promise of what was to come. Come. As the ship hurtled through space, Timothy's mind raced with the possibilities and dangers that lay ahead. The relative calm of their journey was shattered as they approached the United Defense Force space station. The ship's comm system crackled to life, and Major Blackwood's voice filled the cabin. "Prepare for docking," she announced, her tone tense. "We've received special instructions upon arrival." Timothy exchanged a worried glance with Daphne. The word special rarely boded well in military parlance. As the ship docked with a metallic thud, a squad of heavily armed UDF security personnel boarded. Their faces were stone cold, eyes hidden behind reflective visors. "Follow us," the lead officer ordered, his voice devoid of emotion. Timothy, Daphne, and Rodriguez were escorted through the station's sterile corridors, the hum of machinery and low murmur of voices, creating an unsettling atmosphere. They arrived at a high-security debriefing room, its walls a dull gray that seemed to absorb light and hope alike. Inside, they found themselves face-to-face with Admiral Helena Voss, her piercing stare scrutinizing each of them in turn. The newly appointed head of UDF operations in the sector carried an aura of authority that filled the room. "Sit," she commanded, gesturing to the chairs around a large circular table. As they settled, Admiral Voss's eyes locked onto Daphne. "Your mission was successful in gathering crucial intelligence," she began, her voice clipped. "However, your involvement, Ms. Daphne, has created a diplomatic crisis of unprecedented proportions." Timothy felt his muscles tense. He inched his chair closer to Daphne, a subconscious move that didn't go unnoticed by the Admiral. "The Nausicaan government has issued an ultimatum," Voss continued. "Return Daphne to face trial for treason, or face an escalation of the conflict. The implications of this are significant. The room erupted into chaos. Major Blackwood, her face flushed with anger, stood abruptly. With all due respect, Admiral, Daphne is a valuable intelligence asset. Her knowledge of Nausicaan tactics and culture is unparalleled. Handing her over would be a grave mistake. Admiral Voss's eyes narrowed. And starting a full-scale war wouldn't be? We must consider all options for a diplomatic solution. Timothy could no longer contain himself. He rose to his feet, his voice passionate but controlled. Admiral, Daphne risked everything to help us. She's committed to peace between our species. Sending her back would be a death sentence and a betrayal of everything we stand for. The tension in the room was palpable, crackling like static electricity. Before Voss could respond, an urgent beep emanated from the communications console. A holographic display flickered to life, revealing the stern face of Earth's Central Command. Admiral Voss, the figure spoke, his voice grave. The intelligence gathered by Timothy and Daphne has revealed a critical vulnerability in the Nausicaan defenses. We have an opportunity to end this war swiftly, but it requires intimate knowledge of Nausicaan military protocols. All eyes turned to Daphne. She sat straighter, her face a mask of commitment. Admiral Voss's expression shifted, a plan forming behind her eyes. A joint human Nausicaan strike team, she mused aloud, led by Timothy and Daphne, to infiltrate the Nausicaan High Command and disable their primary defense grid. It's risky, but it could force them to the negotiating table without further bloodshed. The implications hung heavy in the air. Timothy's mind raced, weighing duty against his growing feelings for Daphne. The thought of her returning to Nausicaan-controlled space, where capture meant certain death, made his blood run cold. "I need a moment with Daphne," Timothy said, his voice barely above a whisper. Admiral Voss nodded, her eyes softening slightly. "Take 5 minutes, but remember, time is of the essence." Timothy led Daphne to a quiet corner of the room. The hum of the station seemed to fade away as they stood close, eyes locked. "Daphne," Timothy began, his voice hoarse with emotion. "This mission, it's incredibly dangerous. If you're captured—" She placed a finger on his lips, silencing him. "I know the risks, Timothy, but this might be our only chance to end the war, to create the peace we've both fought for." The air between them seemed to crackle with unspoken feelings. Timothy's hand found hers, their fingers intertwining. He leaned in, drawn by an irresistible force. Suddenly, alarms blared throughout the station. Red emergency lights bathed the room in an eerie glow. "Attention all personnel," a computerized voice announced. "Incoming Nausicaan diplomatic vessel. Security teams to your stations." The moment shattered, Timothy and Daphne rushed back to the briefing table. Admiral Voss was already issuing rapid-fire orders into her comm unit. "It seems our time for deliberation has run out," she said grimly. "The Nausicaan ambassador is here to negotiate Daphne's return personally." As if on cue, the door slid open. Flanked by UDF security, a tall, imposing Nausicaan female strode into the room. Her eyes, dark and penetrating, immediately found Daphne. "I am Ambassador Kavasha," she announced, her voice a low growl, "and I am here to reclaim what belongs to the Nausicaan Empire." The room fell silent, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Timothy moved protectively closer to Daphne, his hand instinctively moving to his weapon. Kavasha's lip curled in a sneer. "You humans think you understand the situation, but you know nothing." She turned to Daphne, her expression a mix of anger and something else. Disappointment, perhaps. "Tell them, princess. Tell them who you really are." The word princess hit the room like a thunderbolt. All eyes turned to Daphne, whose face had gone pale. "Is this true?" Admiral Voss demanded, her voice sharp. Daphne stood tall, her eyes meeting Kavasha's unflinching gaze. "Yes," she said, her voice steady despite the trembling of her hands. "I am a member of the Nausicaan royal family. I was to be married to Commander Grok, sealing an alliance between rival factions." She turned to Timothy, her eyes pleading for understanding. "But I couldn't go through with it. Not when I saw the chance for true peace. Not just a fragile alliance built on political marriages." The revelation sent shockwaves through the room. Timothy's mind reeled, trying to process this new information. The Daphne he knew, strong, compassionate, dedicated to peace, suddenly had a new dimension, one that added layers of complexity to an already volatile situation. Admiral Voss's eyes narrowed, her tactical mind already assessing the new possibilities. "This changes everything," she murmured. As the implications of Daphne's royal status sank in, the atmosphere in the room shifted. The proposed mission to infiltrate Nausicaan High Command took on new significance. With Daphne's insider knowledge and royal authority, they might have a chance not just to end the war, but to forge a lasting peace between humans and Nausicaans. Timothy's determination hardened. Whatever came next, whatever dangers they faced, he knew one thing for certain. He would stand by Daphne's side, protecting her and fighting for the peace they both believed in. As tensions rose and plans began to form, Timothy and Daphne exchanged a look of silent understanding. The path ahead was fraught with danger, but together they were ready to face whatever challenges lay in store. The revelation of Daphne's royal lineage hung heavy in the air, casting a new light on their mission and relationship. Admiral Voss, her tactical mind already turning, broke the tense silence. "This changes everything. We need to reassess our strategy immediately." She turned to her communications officer. "Arrange a meeting with the Nausicaan representatives. We may have a chance for a diplomatic solution." As the officer hurried to comply, Timothy felt Daphne's hand slip into his. He gave it a reassuring squeeze, silently communicating his unwavering support. Hours later, they found themselves in a high-security conference room. The stark lighting cast harsh shadows across the faces of those gathered around the large oval table. Admiral Voss sat at the head, her posture rigid. Across from her, Ambassador Kvasha's dark eyes glittered with barely concealed hostility. Timothy and Daphne were seated side by side, their presence a focal point of the negotiations. The tension in the room was palpable, like a coiled spring ready to snap. Kvasha's gravelly voice broke the silence. "Our proposal is simple. Princess Daphne returns to Nausicaan space and fulfills her duty. She marries Commander Grok, sealing the alliance between our factions. In return, we open channels for peace talks with the humans." Timothy felt Daphne stiffen beside him. He fought to keep his face neutral, even as his heart raced at the thought of losing her. Admiral Voss leaned forward, her eyes narrowed. "And what guarantees do we have that you'll follow through on these peace talks?" Before Kvasha could respond, alarms blared throughout the station. Red emergency lights bathed the room in an eerie glow. A voice crackled over the intercom. "Incoming Nausicaan strike force detected. All personnel to battle stations." Chaos erupted in the conference room. Admiral Voss barked orders into her communicator, coordinating the station's defenses. Kvasha's face contorted with rage as she shouted at her aides in rapid-fire Nausicaan. Timothy's training kicked in. He grabbed Daphne's arm, pulling her close. "We need to get you to safety," he said, his voice low and urgent. They slipped out of the conference room, navigating the panicked corridors of the station. Emergency sirens wailed as personnel rushed to their posts. Timothy led Daphne through less-traveled maintenance passages, his combat instincts on high alert. As they rounded a corner into a dimly lit service area, Timothy's hand flew to his weapon. 5 Nausicaan commandos stood before them, their scaled skin glistening in the low light. "Daphne, behind me!" Timothy shouted, drawing his blaster. The air crackled with energy as the first shots were fired. Timothy dove for cover, pulling Daphne with him behind a cluster of power conduits. The acrid smell of ozone filled the air as blaster bolts ricocheted off metal surfaces. Daphne's voice cut through the chaos. "Timothy, on your left!" He spun, catching a Nausicaan trying to flank them. His shot found its mark, and the attacker crumpled to the ground. Daphne was not idle. She grabbed a fallen Nausicaan's weapon, her royal training evident in her precise movements. Together they fought with a synchronicity born of shared battles and growing trust. The skirmish was intense but brief. As the last Nausicaan fell, Timothy felt a searing pain in his leg. He looked down to see a deep gash where a blaster bolt had grazed him. Daphne was at his side in an instant. "Let me help," she said, her hands already moving to the wound. Timothy watched in amazement as a soft glow emanated from Daphne's palms. The pain in his leg subsided, replaced by a warm tingling sensation. As the wound began to close, he found himself lost in Daphne's eyes, their faces mere inches apart. The air between them seemed to electrify. Without thinking, Timothy leaned in, his lips meeting Daphne's in a passionate kiss. She responded with equal fervor, their shared adrenaline and relief pouring into the embrace. They broke apart at the sound of approaching footsteps. Major Blackwood rounded the corner, leading a team of UDF security personnel. "Thank goodness you're all right," Blackwood said, her eyes taking in the scene of the recent battle. "The Nausicaan attack has been repelled, but we're not out of the woods yet." Her face grew grim. "The Nausicaan government is claiming we've been holding Princess Daphne against her will. They've issued an ultimatum: return her within 24 hours or face all-out war." Timothy and Daphne exchanged a look, a silent understanding passing between them. "We have a plan," Timothy said, his voice steady with persistence. Minutes later, they stood before Admiral Voss, outlining their proposal. Timothy spoke with conviction. "We'll infiltrate Nausicaan space together. With Daphne's royal status and my combat skills, we can reach the Nausicaan High Command. We'll expose the truth about Daphne's defection and the potential for peace." Admiral Voss listened intently, her brow furrowed in concentration. After a long moment, she nodded. "It's risky, but it might be our only chance. I'll have our stealth ship prepared immediately." As Timothy and Daphne turned to leave, Dr. Emily Chen approached them, a small case in her hands. "I have something that might help," she said, opening the case to reveal 2 vials of luminescent blue liquid. "This bio-enhancing serum will boost your physical capabilities temporarily. It could give you an edge in Nausicaan territory." Timothy took the vials, noting the doctor's hesitation. "What's the catch?" Dr. Chen's expression was serious. "The serum has side effects. It heightens emotional responses and physical sensations. You'll need to stay focused despite these effects." With a nod of understanding, Timothy and Daphne accepted the vials. As they made their way to the launch bay, the weight of their mission settled upon them. The fate of 2 species hung in the balance, and time was running out. The stealth ship hummed to life as they boarded, its sleek design a testament to the latest in human Nausicaan hybrid technology. As the bay doors opened, revealing the vast expanse of space, Timothy and Daphne shared a final look. No words were needed. They both knew the risks, the potential consequences of failure. But in that moment, as the ship accelerated into the darkness of space, they also knew they wouldn't want anyone else by their side for this perilous journey. The stealth ship disappeared into the void, its course set for the heart of Nausicaan territory. Inside, Timothy and Daphne prepared themselves for the challenges ahead, their growing bond about to be tested in ways they could never have imagined. The stealth ship glided silently through the inky void of space, its advanced cloaking technology rendering it invisible to Nausicaan sensors. Inside the cockpit, Timothy and Daphne sat side by side, their bodies humming with nervous energy as they approached the heart of Nausicaan territory. As they entered Nausicaan space, Timothy reached for the small case containing Dr. Chen's bioenhancing serum. He hesitated for a moment, then met Daphne's eyes. With a silent nod, they each took a vial and downed the luminescent blue liquid. The effect was almost instantaneous. A rush of warmth spread through Timothy's body, his senses sharpening to an almost painful degree. Colors seemed more vivid, sounds more crisp. He could hear Daphne's quickened breathing beside him, feel the subtle vibrations of the ship's engines through the floor. "Wow," Daphne whispered, her voice sounding impossibly clear. "This is intense." Timothy nodded, trying to focus on the ship's controls. "Stay sharp, we're approaching the capital." As they descended through the atmosphere, Daphne guided them towards a series of hidden landing zones she remembered from her time as a princess. Timothy marveled at her calm efficiency, even as he felt his own emotions swirling just beneath the surface. They touched down in a secluded area on the outskirts of the sprawling Nausicaan capital. As they exited the ship, the alien world assaulted their enhanced senses. The air was thick with unfamiliar scents, the distant sounds of the city a cacophony in their ears. Daphne led the way, her royal upbringing evident in her confident stride. Timothy followed close behind, his tactical training kicking in as he scanned for potential threats. They moved through shadowy alleyways and hidden passages, avoiding the main thoroughfares. As they approached the central government district, Timothy's enhanced hearing picked up the sound of marching feet. He pulled Daphne into a narrow alcove, their bodies pressed close together as a patrol passed by. The physical contact sent a jolt through Timothy's system, the serum amplifying every sensation. Once the danger had passed, they continued on, finally reaching the imposing structure that housed the Nausicaan High Council. Daphne approached a hidden terminal, her fingers flying over the alien controls as she input her royal access codes. "I'm in," she whispered, her eyes scanning the data scrolling across the screen. "They're in session now, discussing the ultimatum." Timothy leaned in, his breath warm on her neck as he read over her shoulder. Suddenly, Daphne gasped. "This can't be right," she muttered, her fingers working frantically to access more files. "What is it?" Timothy asked, tension coiling in his gut. Daphne turned to him, her eyes wide with shock. "It's General Krav. He's been manipulating both sides, prolonging the war for his own gain. The recent attacks, the ultimatum, it's all part of his plan." Timothy's mind raced, processing the implications of this revelation. "We need to expose him, to both the Council and the UDF. Daphne nodded, her face set with grit. "I have an idea, but it's risky." As she outlined her plan, Timothy felt a surge of admiration for her quick thinking and courage. The bioenhancing serum seemed to heighten these feelings, making his chest tight with emotion. They made their way towards the council chambers, using Daphne's knowledge of the building's layout to avoid security. As they rounded a corner, they came face to face with a Nausicaan patrol led by a familiar figure, Commander Grok. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. Then, with inhuman speed, Timothy sprang into action. The serum coursing through his veins gave him strength and agility beyond his normal capabilities. He dodged a blast from Grok's weapon and closed the distance, engaging the Nausicaan in hand-to-hand combat. Daphne was a blur of motion beside him, her royal combat training augmented by the serum. Together they moved with uncanny synchronization, taking down the patrol without raising an alarm. As the last Nausicaan fell, Timothy and Daphne stood panting, the rush of combat singing in their veins. Their eyes met, and for a moment the air between them crackled with an almost palpable energy. Pushing aside the distraction of their heightened emotions, they pressed on. Using a combination of Daphne's authority and Timothy's tech skills, they bypassed the final security measures and slipped into a hidden observation gallery above the council chambers. Below them, the Nausicaan High Council was in session. General Krav stood at the center, his voice booming as he called for immediate, all-out war against the humans. Timothy and Daphne exchanged a look, then set their plan in motion. With access to the communication network, they began broadcasting evidence of Krav's deception to both the council chambers and the UDF leadership. Chaos erupted in the chamber as the truth was revealed. Seizing the moment, Daphne stepped out of hiding, her royal presence commanding instant attention. "Esteemed members of the High Council," her voice rang out, strong and clear, "you have been deceived. The war that has cost so many lives on both sides is built on lies and manipulation." As Daphne continued her impassioned plea for peace, Timothy's enhanced senses picked up movement at the edge of the chamber. General Krav, seeing his plans unraveling, was attempting to flee. Without hesitation, Timothy launched into pursuit. The chase led him through winding corridors, his augmented body pushing to its limits as he followed Krav to a hidden hangar. The general reached a personal shuttle, the engines already humming to life as Timothy burst into the hangar. With a desperate leap, Timothy managed to grab onto the shuttle's landing gear as it lifted off. Inside the council chambers, Daphne continued to make her case, presenting a vision of a peaceful future between humans and Nausicaans. The evidence of Krav's treachery, combined with her passionate words, began to sway even the most hardline council members. Meanwhile, Timothy fought his way into the shuttle, engaging in a fierce hand-to-hand battle with Krav, in the confined space. The general's natural Nausicaan strength was formidable, but Timothy's serum-enhanced abilities allowed him to hold his own. As they grappled for control of the shuttle, the craft careened wildly through the Nausicaan capital's skyline. With a surge of strength, Timothy finally overpowered Krav, securing control of the vessel. With precision born of his UDF training, Timothy managed to redirect the shuttle back towards the council building. The craft came in low and fast, crash landing in the central plaza with a screech of twisting metal. As the dust settled, Timothy emerged from the wreckage, dragging the unconscious form of General Krav. The doors of the council building burst open, Daphne rushing out with a contingent of Nausicaan officials close behind. The dramatic return of Timothy with the captured General Krav provided irrefutable proof of the conspiracy. Faced with the truth and swayed by Daphne's compelling arguments, the Nausicaan High Council agreed to halt their plans for war and open genuine peace negotiations with the human UDF. In the aftermath of these events, Timothy and Daphne found themselves at the center of a whirlwind of activity. As they were escorted to a secure location to await the arrival of human diplomats, the adrenaline of their success combined with the lingering effects of the bioenhancing serum, intensifying the attraction between them. Alone for a moment in a quiet antechamber, they turned to each other, the air thick with unspoken tension. Timothy's enhanced senses were overwhelmed by Daphne's presence. The sound of her rapid heartbeat, the scent of her skin, the heat radiating from her body. Just as they moved towards each other, drawn by an irresistible force, the building shook with a massive explosion. Alarms blared, and the sounds of weapons fire filled the air. "What's happening?" Daphne gasped, her eyes wide with alarm. Timothy's combat instincts kicked in as he moved to secure the room. "It seems not everyone is ready for peace," he said grimly. As they peered out into the corridor, they saw chaos unfolding. A loyalist faction of the Nausicaan military, resistant to the idea of peace with humans, had launched a surprise attack on the government district. Timothy and Daphne exchanged a look, both knowing their mission was not nearly finished. The fragile peace they had just achieved was under immediate threat, and once again they found themselves thrust into the heart of danger. The conflict. Timothy gripped Daphne's hand, his enhanced senses picking up the rapid increase in her heart rate. "We need to move," he said, pulling her towards the door. "This building isn't safe anymore." They burst into the corridor, immediately assaulted by the cacophony of battle. Energy blasts sizzled through the air, leaving scorch marks on the ornate walls. The acrid smell of smoke filled their nostrils as they sprinted down the hallway, ducking and weaving to avoid debris raining down from the ceiling. Timothy's combat instincts kicked into high gear, his body moving with fluid precision as he led Daphne through the chaos. They rounded a corner and came face to face with a group of loyalist Nausicaan soldiers. Without hesitation, Timothy launched into action, his movements a blur as he engaged the first two attackers. Daphne, drawing on her royal combat training, dispatched the third soldier with a series of precise strikes. As the last Nausicaan fell, she turned to Timothy, her eyes wide with a mix of exhilaration and fear. "The government district is under attack," she said, her voice steady despite the circumstances. "We need to find a way to coordinate with our allies." Timothy nodded, his mind racing through potential strategies. "Let's head for the central plaza. We might be able to regroup with the reformist forces there." They made their way through the war-torn streets, the once grand Nausicaan capital, now a battlefield. Energy blasts crisscrossed the sky, and the ground shook with the impact of heavy weapons fire. As they approached a collapsed building, Timothy's enhanced hearing picked up faint cries for help. "Wait," he said, grabbing Daphne's arm. "There are civilians trapped in there." Without hesitation, they changed course, heading towards the rubble. Timothy's muscles strained as he lifted a massive piece of debris, the bioserum amplifying his strength beyond normal human limits. Daphne crawled into the opening, her voice calm and reassuring, as she spoke to the trapped Nausicaans in their native tongue. One by one, they helped the civilians out of the wreckage. Daphne's knowledge of Nausicaan physiology proved invaluable as she quickly assessed and treated their injuries. A group of Nausicaan soldiers, both loyalists and reformists, paused their fighting to watch the rescue unfold. As the last civilian was pulled to safety, A loyalist soldier lowered his weapon, a look of confusion crossing his face. "Why would you help us?" he asked, his voice gruff but tinged with curiosity. Daphne stood tall, her royal bearing evident despite the dust and grime covering her clothes. "Because all life is precious," she said. "Nausicaan or human, we're not so different. This war has already cost too much." Her words seemed to resonate with some of the loyalist soldiers, causing them to exchange uncertain glances. The moment was shattered by the sound of approaching ships. Timothy looked up to see a fleet of UDF vessels entering the atmosphere, led by a familiar command ship. "Admiral Voss," he said, a smile tugging at his lips. "Looks like the cavalry has arrived." As the UDF forces engaged the loyalist ships in the sky above, Timothy and Daphne pressed on towards the Nausicaan command center. The streets became a maze of firefights and crumbling buildings, forcing them to rely on Daphne's intimate knowledge of the capital's layout to navigate safely. They finally reached the command center, only to find it under heavy attack by loyalist forces. Timothy's enhanced vision picked out a towering Nausicaan leading the assault. Commander Xyrax, known for his unwavering support of General Crab's warmongering policies. "We need to get inside," Daphne said, her eyes scanning the battlefield. "The command center's communication systems are our best chance to coordinate a defense." Timothy nodded, his muscles tensing in anticipation of the fight ahead. "I'll create a diversion. You get to the main control room and see if you can activate the building's defenses." With a shared look of willpower, they sprang into action. Timothy charged towards the loyalist forces, drawing their fire as Daphne slipped around the side of the building. His enhanced reflexes allowed him to dodge energy blasts with inhuman speed, closing the distance to engage in hand-to-hand combat. Commander Xyrax roared in challenge, meeting Timothy's charge head-on. The two collided in a flurry of strikes, each pushing their bodies to the limit. Timothy's human adaptability and the lingering effects of the bioserum allowed him to match the Nausicaaan's superior strength and endurance. Inside the command center, Daphne worked furiously at the control panels, her fingers flying over the alien interface. With a triumphant cry, she activated the building's defense systems. Energy shields sprang to life, repelling the loyalist forces surrounding the facility. Timothy and Xyrax continued their brutal duel, oblivious to the shifting tide of battle around them. Each blow landed with bone-jarring force, neither combatant willing to give ground. Just as Timothy began to gain the upper hand, Xyrax's eyes gleamed with malicious intent. "You may defeat me, human," he snarled, "but you cannot stop what's coming. The explosives are already in place. If I fall, the entire government district burns." Timothy's mind raced, processing the implications of Xyrax's threat. In that split second, he made his decision. Instead of delivering a finishing blow, he altered his stance, aiming to subdue rather than kill. The change in tactics caught Xyrax off guard. Timothy used the Nausicaaan's momentum against him, executing a complex grappling maneuver that left the commander pinned and gasping for air. As Xyrax struggled to break free, Timothy tightened his hold, cutting off the Nausicaaan's blood flow until he lost consciousness. With Xyrax secured, Timothy turned to find Daphne emerging from the command center, flanked by a mix of UDF peacekeepers and reformist Nausicaan troops. Her eyes widened as she took in the scene. "Timothy, are you all right?" she asked, rushing to his side. He nodded, still catching his breath. "We've got a bigger problem. Xyrax claims there are explosives hidden throughout the capital. We need to find them. Fast." Daphne's expression hardened with perseverance. She turned to address the gathered forces, her voice carrying the unmistakable authority of Nausicaan royalty. "Listen to me. There are bombs planted in the government district. We need search teams deployed immediately. Every second counts." As the joint human-Nausicaan team scrambled to action, Timothy and Daphne shared a look of unwavering drive. They knew that the next few hours would determine not just the fate of the peace initiative, but the lives of thousands of innocents caught in the crossfire. With no time to waste, they joined the search efforts, racing against the clock to prevent a catastrophe that could shatter any hope for lasting peace between their species. Peoples. The urgency of their situation left no room for hesitation. Timothy and Daphne exchanged a determined look, their drive strengthened by the challenges they had already overcome together. "We need to end this once and for all," Timothy said, his voice low and intense. "The Loyalists' superweapon must be neutralized." Daphne nodded, her eyes gleaming with a mix of persistence and concern. "I know the location of their moon base. It's our best shot at stopping them for good." Without wasting another moment, they made their way to a nearby hangar, where a sleek, modified stealth shuttle awaited them. As they boarded, Timothy felt a renewed surge of energy coursing through his veins. The bio-enhancing serum was still at work, sharpening his senses and amplifying his strength. The shuttle lifted off smoothly, its advanced cloaking technology rendering it nearly invisible as they ascended through the Nausicaan atmosphere. Timothy's enhanced reflexes allowed him to pilot the craft with unparalleled precision, while Daphne's intimate knowledge of Nausicaan defense systems guided them safely past the planet's orbital security grid. As they approached the moon base, the stark, cratered landscape loomed before them. Daphne's fingers danced across the shuttle's control panel, bypassing security protocols and creating a gap in the base's detection grid. "There," she said, pointing to a narrow ravine. "We can land there and approach on foot. The base's main entrance is just beyond that ridge." Timothy brought the shuttle down with expert skill, touching down silently in the shadows of the lunar mountains. As they exited the craft, the reduced gravity of the moon made their movements feel light and fluid. They moved swiftly across the barren surface, their specially designed suits allowing them to navigate the harsh environment with ease. As they neared the base entrance, Timothy's enhanced hearing picked up the sound of approaching guards. With a silent gesture, he signaled to Daphne, and they took cover behind a large boulder. 2 Nausicaan soldiers passed by, their conversation drifting through the thin atmosphere. "Heard General Vrock say the weapon will be ready soon. Both humans and traitors will pay," one guard muttered. Once the coast was clear, Timothy and Daphne slipped inside the base through a maintenance hatch. The interior was a maze of sterile corridors and bustling activity. They moved cautiously, using Daphne's knowledge of Nausicaan military layouts to navigate towards the heart of the facility. As they rounded a corner, they came face to face with a squad of Loyalist soldiers. Without hesitation, Timothy sprang into action. His movements were a blur as he engaged the first 2 attackers, his augmented strength allowing him to overpower them quickly. Daphne, drawing on her royal combat training, dispatched the remaining guards with a series of precise strikes. As the last Nausicaan fell, she turned to Timothy, her breath coming in the short gasps. "We need to hurry," she said. "The control room should be just ahead." They pressed on, encountering sporadic resistance along the way. Timothy's enhanced abilities and Daphne's tactical knowledge made them an unstoppable team, efficiently neutralizing any threats they encountered. As they approached the control room, they overheard a familiar voice, General Vrock, the Loyalist leader. His words sent a chill down their spines. "Prepare the targeting systems," Vrock commanded. "We'll strike at the heart of both Nausicaan and human population centers. This war ends today with our victory." Timothy and Daphne shared a look of grim understanding. The stakes had never been higher. With a silent nod, they launched their assault on the control room. Timothy burst through the door, immediately engaging the surprised guards in close-quarters combat. His augmented reflexes allowed him to dodge energy blasts and counterattack with devastating efficiency. Meanwhile, Daphne slipped past the chaos, making her way to the main control console. Her fingers flew over the alien interface as she worked to override the weapon systems. The battle raged around them, with Timothy facing multiple Nausicaan warriors simultaneously. He pushed his body to its limits, each movement precise and powerful. Despite the odds, he held his ground, buying Daphne the time she needed. Suddenly, a shout of triumph rang out. "The firing sequence has been initiated," General Vrock announced, his eyes gleaming with malicious intent. Daphne redoubled her efforts, her mind racing as she worked to crack the final layers of security. Timothy, seeing Vrock raise a weapon towards her, made a split-second decision. He threw himself into the line of fire, taking a devastating hit that sent him crashing to the ground. Daphne's eyes widened in horror, but she forced herself to focus on the task at hand. With a surge of grit, she channeled all her energy into the final override sequence. The seconds ticked by agonizingly slowly as she worked, the fate of millions hanging in the balance. Just as the weapon's energy began to build, Daphne let out a cry of victory. The console flashed green, and a cascade of system failures rippled through the base. The superweapon powered down, rendered permanently inoperable. With the immediate threat neutralized, Daphne rushed to Timothy's side. His injuries were severe, and she could see the effects of the bioenhancing serum rapidly fading from his system. Drawing on every ounce of her healing abilities, Daphne placed her hands on Timothy's chest. A soft glow emanated from her palms as she poured her energy into him, willing his wounds to close and his strength to return. The process was intense and intimate, creating a profound connection between them. As Daphne's healing energies flowed into Timothy, their minds and bodies became linked in a way neither had experienced before. Flashes of shared memories danced through their consciousness, their first confrontation, the growing trust between them, the moments of tension and camaraderie that had led them to this point. Through it all, a deep, undeniable bond had formed, transcending their differences and uniting them in a common purpose. Daphne pushed herself to her limits, refusing to give up on Timothy. Her entire being focused on healing him, on bringing him back from the brink. She could feel his life force growing stronger, his heartbeat steadying under her touch. As the healing process reached its peak, a blinding light filled the control room. When it faded, Timothy and Daphne lay unconscious on the floor, their hands intertwined and their bodies glowing faintly with residual energy. The sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the corridor outside. Admiral Voss burst into the room, leading a joint task force of UDF and reformist Nausicaan troops. He surveyed the scene, the disabled superweapon, the subdued loyalist forces, and the two figures at the center of it all. As medics rushed to attend to Timothy and Daphne, Admiral Voss couldn't help but marvel at what they had accomplished. Their actions had not only averted a catastrophic war, but had opened the door to a new era of cooperation between humans and Nausicaans. The unconscious forms of Timothy and Daphne were carefully transported to the medical bay of the UDF flagship. As they were placed side by side in the recovery room, their hands remained clasped together, a testament to the unbreakable bond forged in the crucible of their shared ordeal. The medical staff worked tirelessly to stabilize their conditions, monitoring their vital signs and administering advanced treatments. Hours turned into days as Timothy and Daphne remained in a state of deep healing sleep, their bodies and minds recovering from the intense strain they had endured. Throughout their recovery, a constant stream of visitors came to pay their respects and offer support. Human and Nausicaan officials alike recognized the profound impact of their actions, and whispers of a new peace initiative began to circulate through diplomatic channels. As the days passed, the medical staff noticed something remarkable. Timothy and Daphne's vital signs seemed to be synchronized, their heartbeats and brainwaves falling into perfect harmony. It was as if their connection had transcended the physical, linking them on a fundamental level. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Timothy's eyes began to flutter open. He blinked, disoriented, as the stark white ceiling of the medical bay came into focus. His body felt weak, but there was a warmth spreading through him, emanating from his hand. He turned his head, his gaze falling on Daphne's peaceful face beside him. As if sensing his awareness, her eyes opened, meeting his with a look of profound relief and joy. Their fingers intertwined, they shared a moment of silent communication, words unnecessary to express the depth of their feelings. The trials they had faced together, the sacrifices they had made, and the bond they had forged. It all culminated in this quiet moment of connection. As they lay there, recovering and reconnecting, the galaxy around them continued to change. The news of their heroic actions spread, inspiring both humans and Nausicaans to embrace the possibility of lasting peace. The seeds of cooperation they had planted were beginning to blossom, promising a future brighter than either species had dared to imagine. Timothy and Daphne knew that their journey was far from finished. There would be challenges ahead, bridges to build, and wounds to heal. But as they gazed into each other's eyes, they felt ready to face whatever the future might hold. Together.
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.